Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast, where we explore all the emerging technologies, challenges, promises, and perils. We're coming at you not live, but pseudo-live at Texas Policy Summit 2025 at the AT&T Conference Center. We got Zach in the show today, partner in crime in the tech team, and we're joined with our out-of-state colleague, Christian Cochran, who is our Right on Crime policy expert and really a phenomenal resource on artificial intelligence and technology and the intersection between criminal justice and tech. And we're going to get all into that discussion. But first, Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And how has your experience in Austin been so far?
I have loved it. I've probably ate my way through Austin, so I've had a great time so far. So it's been really good.
Good. Well, before we get into the discussion here today, and we're going to talk about research forthcoming from y'all's out with Right on Crime, and again, that intersection. For our listeners who may not have been tuning in to TPS, I want to take a second. What's been y'all's favorite panel or discussion or just like major takeaway from TPS this year?
Go ahead. It's actually our panel. I'll be a little bit biased and say blind justice, but we talked about the weaponization of the justice system and how it's a major concern. And so it kind of segues well into AI and tech and where the technology could possibly go.
Yeah, and that was Brett Tolman.
It was Brett Tolman,
yep.
So.
Yep. Well, any panel he's on is going to be one of the best, if not the best. Right. I can say that too. Yeah, how about you? I mean, you had a great panel.
We had a great panel, and I'll also be biased and say my panel was our favorite panel. And so I did a panel on artificial intelligence, promises and perils of AI, and we had Senator Charles Schwartner, who's the chair of the Senate Business and Commerce Committee, who's going to be handling a lot of the AI work all over in the Senate. Not all of it, but a lot of it. We had Representative Giovanni Capriglione, a return, who's been a guest on our podcast before, and we had a really good conversation. We talked about stuff in the news, DeepSeek and the Stargate funding, and we talked about what the legislature might consider this session, how we can use AI for more government efficiency, the energy aspects in AI, and it was really cool to have Dr. Schwartner's perspective on AI in healthcare from the position of a practicing physician. What do you think about AI? So our panel was great. It was a great conversation. We had an engaged audience, a packed room. So thank you to everybody that came.
Yeah, and that's going to be on YouTube, all these panels too, so be sure and check those out. Well, let's get into the discussion. And Christian, let's start. You've got a great background that sets you up very well for this discussion and your current post in leading state efforts in Florida. So what's been your background and what kind of brought you into the movement here?
Sure. I actually, before I was ever in the policy space, I was actually a deputy sheriff in the Panhandle of Florida, and I spent a couple of years doing that. I've come from a big law enforcement family, and so I started. I've always been kind of that nerdy guy that likes new stuff to come. I'm not techie at all, but I like new stuff that comes out, new gizmos and gadgets. But when I started looking at I was like, wow, this is a lot of tech that's kind of entering into the CJ space, like in a very quick amount of time. How does that impact the criminal justice system moving forward? I mean, obviously, we want a more efficient, but we want a justice system that works well for people, that's just. And so I was like, well, let's look at a research paper on it. And so I went down a deep dive, and my poor wife has had to hear me just sounding. I'm like, look at this, and bless her heart.
The best sounding board.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's. I remember Zach and I were chatting about this beforehand. You reached out to us, and because for folks who don't know, Right on Crime, a national effort. First Step Act was really what catapulted our national presence. Right. Sure. You guys have been just killing it ever since, and even before that. You reached out to us and said, hey, I'm looking at AI. I would love to pick your brain. And Zach and I will not forget this. We get off the call. I pop out of my office, walk into his, and I'm like, I think we picked his brain for the entirety of that call.
Yes.
I remember you had some cool comments and insights that kind of sparked our research too.
Yeah. Well, and I remember. So you had written this sort of contemporaneously as we were drafting our paper, and one of the sections of the paper that I wrote was our, law enforcement, AI in the courts, and the broader justice system. And we had been, we've been eyeball deep in AI research for over a year and a half, and we have a lot to learn. And when you sent me your research paper, it was absolutely amazing how much you were able to recognize and spot all the issues that were of consequence in the conversation. And so I remember getting the research paper, and I was like, we have a lot to learn. And then I remember when you sent it to me, I didn't know if you like just wanted us to read it or whatever, but for some reason I like put on my law review editor hat,
so perfect.
and we went through and ultimately I think it's to David's point, it's that the collaborative spirit that we have within the foundation, using our areas of expertise to advance good public policy, and you have a tremendous research product that is going to be useful for lawmakers, not in Florida, not in Texas, but across the whole country. So way to go!
I appreciate it. No, it is truly amazing to see how much AI could be super revolutionary to basically anything. It's what's the model? Everywhere in everything or something like that is what some of these tech companies are saying. And honestly, I get an email a day that something has changed. Well, we have AI now, so it's kind of amazing. But in the CJ space, I mean, you are seeing a lot more usage. With body cameras that are able to do report writing. I used to be I was a cop, and so writing a report. This is kind of an amazing technology, and I'm like, okay, if I'm doing something and this thing is recording as I'm doing it, this could be a really help for me when I'm trying to, I'm 3 cases back, I'm on a midnight shift, and this thing at least gives me the primer so I can go ahead and say, okay, because what it does is it'll fill in spots, and then the officer would have to come in and each one of these spots and say, okay, this is what happened or didn't happen.
Right.
Obviously, there is a concern, though, too, with the possibility for AI to hallucinate. And hallucination, for maybe if the audience doesn't know, is when AI just kind of makes something up, and we don't really know what happens, how it got there, and so that, that may be of a concern if you're an officer and you didn't check it and you say, oh, you turned this in, now you've turned it in, well, now it's part of the police report, now this is now involved, so it's concerning. The other aspect too with AI and the amount of data, I mean, it's wild to me how much of our data is just kind of out there, right? I mean, so much of it, and so when it comes to privacy, it's very concerning with how much driving around, how many times you'll probably get popped by an automatic license plate reader just going to anywhere. I mean, I count probably 3 or 4 on my drive into work every day. So it's kind of interesting to see how those are coming up, but how they're also helping officers, because I've got police officer friends that will just tell me how flock cameras have done wonderful things for them and able to track down maybe a hit and run subject or something by plugging in the information. As I mentioned, though, there's also the concern of that's a lot of times that your information is getting recorded, and so it's a little bit concerning at the same time. It's trying to find that balance between, helping officers to do their job well and making it, easier for them, but at the same time, we don't want to lose civil liberties in the same process, and so we've got to find a nice little balancing area so we can move forward. And so that's what I really wanted to target in the research paper, is looking at privacy, transparency, and what's the legal landscape look like with AI. I mean, because it's moved so fast, we're always going to be playing kind of a catch-up role and when it comes to technology.
And you're smart to say you're pursuing this more specific path of tech within CJ, because we have job security in perpetuity. And I like to remind our CEO of that maybe a little too often. But you mentioned something I think is worth following up on. You said, hey, I see 3 of these ALPRs when I'm driving around. I don't think most folks know what they look like and where they are. So I guess 2 questions here, maybe one's more of a statement. When you look at the defund the police movement and what's happened there, and of course there's been lawlessness and crime in major cities unlike anything we've seen in recent history, but there's also been this almost capitulation that, well, because we have these very narrow and scarce budgets now, we have to turn to technology more, which can be good for efficiency, but it also can result in a crutch and not an augmentation, which is kind of hitting on your goal there. So the second piece I would say is, has a lot of this rollout from your perspective, and as a former law enforcement officer, has it been done transparently? Do you think the public fully knows kind of the scope of tech in criminal justice and law enforcement? Any analysis that you've done on that side?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I go into that in the paper, because I mean, a lot of agencies across the country are having a hard time staffing. I mean, it's just what's going on right now. And if I have a technology that is cheaper, that I can run constantly, that I'm not having to pay, I'm probably paying a subscription fee that's just probably a lot cheaper than having to pay for an officer to be in a certain area, that's pretty amazing. But to that degree, across the country, we're seeing different areas where there is kind of that piecemeal approach of, yes, some areas are requiring law enforcement to provide more information about what they are using. New York City, they passed a citywide ordinance that requires the New York Police Department to say, okay, this is the surveillance surveillance equipment we are using. Maryland just with their facial recognition, they're actually having their Maryland State Police review the technology and then put out basically a model policy for framework for then agencies within the state to then adopt based off of what Maryland State Police's review is. So we're seeing some of that, but on the other note, we're not seeing some states or agencies really be that forthcoming on the information of how they're using it, what they're using it, and I can tell you that as an officer, no matter how much tech you use, at the end of the day, the relationship between the community and the agency is that's the only way you're going to solve crimes. That's it. You can put any tech in the world you want to put out there, but if you don't have the community's help, it's not going to work ever.
Yeah. It is, and I mean, not to get to whatever we want to call this, philosophical about it, but it is. It's that, and it's balancing that tension between the power of the state to enforce law and order and protecting citizens from overreach. And so, transparency measures, I think, are really important and common sense. And maybe in some specific instance, I'm trying to think of like a certain category of crime. Maybe maybe that we say law enforcement disclose the things, the technologies that you use, but maybe there's like a special child sex crime investigation unit or something like that, and we'd say we don't want to tip off these people, or a joint terrorism task force or something like that. Like, you can make maybe some common sense exceptions, but to your point, the broader goal is you build and foster trust within the populace and within the community when you have that honesty and transparency, and it helps people just feel safer and have a greater trust for law enforcement. We're great people.
Yeah, and it is really that trust between the community that can really shape a case in a heartbeat, right? And to your point too, I think there's concerns with, if it's in the public domain, if you've got cameras that are setting up everywhere, and you're in the name of public safety, we want to make sure we use the best tech, the best technology, everything, right? But we don't want to be mass surveillance at the same time, and people will start feeling overwhelmed that I'm constantly being watched. How is this protecting me at some point, right? Because now you're just looking for me to do something, right? I might not be committing a crime, but if it's constantly out there, you're maybe just waiting for me to do something, and I don't even know I've done something. So I mean, that makes and honestly, probably people are not even doing that. They just feel overwhelmed with having something like that on them, right?
Yeah. Yes. And that's looking at the case study for tech, right, which we could wax poetic about for hours. People don't trust technology companies. In fact, the confidence rate in Congress is higher than that of companies like Meta. And, we're seeing some changes there, thanks to kind of this red pilling moment that's happening and this new tech, right? But, we talk about this too with smart cities. In smart cities, there's this inextricable relationship between data-driven policing, surveillance, social scoring, but heaven forbid we call it that. And one of the things I talk about constantly is Vision Zero. A lot of cities have this vision where there are zero fatalities, there's no automobile incidents that result in injury, which is a laudable, idyllic mission. But how do we accomplish that? We get rid of manually driven cars. And who's controlling these cars? The software, Google. Do they have our best interests in mind? We'll let our listeners decide. But the point is, and this is where that balance has to be key, because if constituents already have a distrust in these technology companies, like who is Flock? Who is Clear? What are their goals?
Yeah, and when you said zero, Vision Zero, my mind went to what the Flock CEO said, is I envision a world with a Flock camera on every street corner with the goal of having no crime, and almost a very dystopian Minority Report type approach to say we will stop crime before it happens. And as wonderful as that sounds, how absolutely terrifying is that? Because you're going to sweep up people just walking down the street, and they didn't chew the gum the right way, and now they're going to I mean, it's an extreme example, but
sure, I mean, it is very concerning for people like that, right? You don't want to feel like you're constantly being watched and feeling like, okay, the future crime aspect of Minority Report, right? It's going to happen because we see this and we're doing all this predictive, using all these algorithms, and this is what's going to happen. Well, I mean, that's it sounds great in science fiction, but when it comes to real life, it's just not going to work, right? And the thing is, and the point in the research paper is, I'm not trying to say law enforcement don't use this. This is don't use this. This is bad. But let's have some transparency in usage and telling what people are using, and let's kind of understand that maybe let's bring some community leaders in and stakeholders, and let's come together and let's have a conversation, because as much as tech, you say that people are concerned about tech companies, you probably should be equally as concerned about what the government's doing with your data at the same time, if not more concerned with it, because it's in this ethers of government. I mean, where does it go at some point? I mean, with tech, at least there's some okay, we kind of see where they're going on.
Sure.
But government, does it just go into this filing box? Because where does it go?
Right. Yeah. I mean, tech companies will say, well, the more data we collect, the better the tailored services, the better the algorithm and all that. With government, it's public safety and it's national security.
Sure.
But at what end? I mean, we had Brett on. He's talking about FISA and he's talking about the surveillance state. And the shift has been, you talk about this post 9/11, government surveillance turned private surveillance, but now private public working together. And so we're right there with you in the trenches. We chatted briefly over the conference about some legislation moving through Florida. Is there anything that you've been monitoring in kind of the tech CJ space, or things that you're hoping to see maybe the next session?
Yeah, so there was one bill filed the other day, and it's the first one that's actually gone after looking at AI's usage in public safety, and it's mainly looking at one company, I would say, or one technology. That's a better way to phrase it, is not gunshot detection, firearm detection on people. And so one company is Zero Eyes, and they're used in schools quite a bit, especially in Florida. And I mean, it's really cool tech. I mean, where they're able to say, they put it on a camera and they say, okay, there's somebody walking through the school that has a gun. It immediately notifies their headquarters, and then somebody who's a man in the loop looks at it and goes, okay, there's somebody with there. They dispatch the law enforcement, so we can.
And I've been full disclosure, I've met with the flock people. We talked about our paper, and within a matter of even 10 seconds.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing technology, and I'm like, I love this. But there's also the concern of, we want it in schools, we want it in places that we can harden soft targets, where we can harden a lot more. But in public space, what happens when you start putting that technology out there? And so that was one thing that one of the two of the legislators had looked at, and they said, whoa, let's hold off on this a little bit more, because at some point you're violating not only somebody's Fourth Amendment right in our mind, but you're also violating their Second Amendment rights, because you have a right. We have constitutional carry in the state of Florida. If I'm carrying in a public space, why are you suddenly kind of making me a target on this? And so that's something I'm definitely monitoring moving forward as we go into session. I would love to see a little bit more transparency on the usage. One of the things I see a lot of tech policy that goes around is there's data requirements and there's data retention requirements, and that with companies and stuff. One thing I'd like to see a little bit more is with government usage, how much data retention, because there seems to be somewhat of a carve out, or maybe not a carve out, but maybe just a mistaken. We left out government. Well, okay, well, let's maybe talk about what they're doing too, and how much data retention they're doing and how long you're keeping it. Because, I mean, we've seen, government is not immune to hackers and what can happen. I mean, so that's very concerning on how much data is taken out.
Yeah. We had an AI advisory council during the interim where we heard from state agencies talking about how they're applying AI technologies, and there's a lot of good actors, to be clear, and there are some specific ones. Office of Attorney General, they're doing a great job operationalizing new technologies, kind of in the vein of Doge and efficiency.
Sure.
But then others who, they came in and said, we don't know where our data is stored, and the quote-unquote data house not in order, it's unclean, it's untidy, and that's another thing. We need to have governance and very clear stewardship over that data before we're applying these AI technologies en masse, because that's where cyber attackers come in and bad discriminatory outcomes can happen.
Yeah, and you say that across state government, and that's true, but particularly in the law enforcement space where jeopardy is at stake. And we talked, beforehand, on data provenance, knowing, but in law enforcement, I mean, you know this. You have to know the chain of custody of the evidence. And if you don't know, and as we use these new technologies, if we don't have a good chain of custody on the evidence, that could be admissibility out the window.
Oh, quickly.
And that makes it hard. You know, it's that balancing act of, yes, we want to protect civil liberties and due process and all that, but it could make or break the difference of getting some really bad dude off the street.
Oh, guaranteed. I mean, and we've seen it, so much of it. I mean, we see a lot with the child sexual abuse material, where they're kind of really hitting into the space. But we're also seeing, I mean, one of the examples I used in the paper was there was a gentleman in Hong Kong who thought he was on a call with his team, and all of a sudden he transferred a bunch of money, and then he finds out, oh wait, these people were all using some kind of deepfake technology, so they couldn't tell who I was, and so now he's transferred this money. What happens now? And so it's really concerning on how much could really impact pretty much every sector. It's pretty interesting. But at the same time, I don't think we need to necessarily fear the growth of AI, because we want to embrace the innovation that comes with it. Because, I mean, from a law enforcement perspective, I mean, you think about, and this goes back to my, wanting law enforcement to use it as, we see, law enforcement used to be sitting at the donut shop with the lighting, writing the paper and writing the reports. Okay, they got the two-way radio, and they started kind of, law enforcement and public safety has always been like the forefront of embracing new technology. And I think this is just a carry forward of what we've seen so much in the past.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Well, Christian, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to say this live. Well, again, I keep saying live because all these people are walking by. There's so much excitement. I'm overstimulated. I want to continue our partnership with Right on Crime. What you guys are doing in this fight, I think folks don't always realize how important this is, because it happens slowly, then all at once when our civil liberties are gone. So thank you for fighting in the trenches on behalf of Floridians, Texans, and all Americans. Yep. Any final words, any wisdom you want to impart on me and Zach, our audience?
No, I just really appreciate you having me on here, and I've enjoyed having a chance to talk to y'all for the last almost year as we've gone through this paper and trying to figure out a path forward. So thank you both very much for y'all's insight and help with this.
Absolutely.
Yes, thanks for being with us.
Yeah. Tech bros live and die together.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and on the tech bro note, like, what are we wearing?
Yeah, I know.
We look absolutely ridiculous.
My boss told me I'd be fired if I wore a t-shirt. So yeah, sorry audience, but well, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you in t-shirts and puffer vests next time.